U.S. forces in World War I. They were called the American Expeditionary Force because they were on an expedition to France. And they were commanded by General Blackjack Pershing. And symbolically, the ships arrived in France on July 4th, 1917. Symbolically, that day was picked because the French had helped us during the American Revolution, and now we were there to help them in their hour of need. And the American soldiers are seen as heroes and saviors by the French people.
Having crossed the Atlantic despite the threat of German U-boats, the commander of the American Expeditionary Force is first to disembark. General John Pershing, 57, is fresh from his great success leading the Mexican military expedition. He lands at Boulogne on June 13, 1917. The French admire his fine military bearing and dashing appearance. Parisians welcome him with hope, born out of anguish. His first act is to pay his respects with Marshal Joffre at the tomb of Lafayette.
3,000 miles from home, an American army is fighting for peace.
On June 23, 1917, the mayor of Saint-Nazaire posts these notices. In a few hours, American troops will land at Saint-Nazaire. We owe them the friendliest of welcomes. Let us cheer our allies as they pass. Let us wave flags in their honor. The great American Republic and our own are fighting for the same ideal of civilization, justice, and honor. Long live the United States of America. Long live France. Soon, there will be 1 million U.S. soldiers. At first, the Americans wear the campaign hat, but soon switch to the more effective British helmet. But even so, the boys are instantly recognizable. They are cool, with friendly smiles. The French dub them Sammies, as in Uncle Sam. For their part, the Americans call the French Froggies, because they're known for eating frogs' legs. Corporal Charlie Bell, 20, from Boston, Massachusetts, writes, "These people drink wine as if it was water." Too young to drink at home, the Americans quickly develop a taste for wine. Another soldier writes to the New York Tribune, "We have come to fight for France, and in exchange we are pounced upon by a greedy people that sees us only as dollar signs." But in general, the U.S. troops are popular everywhere they go. A Paris newspaper publishes a letter to the editor. "I am the happiest of Parisian shopgirls, and soon I will be the happiest of all women, when I am pronounced Mrs. Robinson."
For the Americans' part, they're nicknamed Doughboys or Yankees, and Doughboys comes from their fondness for fried foods like donuts. As you know from previous work that we've done, living and fighting in the trenches was no fun, and the food, Army food, is always terrible. Most soldiers were of white European descent, and many were immigrants, but many minority groups served in the war: African Americans, Native Americans, Hispanic, Asians, and women. African Americans at the time still fought in segregated units, but there were more opportunities to become officers. And in fact, they fought not just as soldiers, but there were black officers, pilots, and many doctors and nurses as well. These New York soldiers, nicknamed the Harlem Hellcats, won the French medal Croix de Guerre for their bravery. In fact, that is the highest medal that France gives out. Freedom abroad, freedom at home. Truth is, African American soldiers were not really treated with a lot of racism in Europe, especially by French people who saw them as heroes, as saviors, and they didn't really distinguish black soldiers versus white. And these soldiers who fought for democracy in Europe will accept nothing less when they come home. And W.E.B. Du Bois's ideas start to really eclipse Booker T. Washington, and he's much more popular after World War I. Native Americans also fought in the war. And Native Americans have a strong warrior tradition, and since World War I have served in the U.S. military in very high numbers compared to other groups. These guys, the Choctaw Telephone Squad, they spoke their native language to keep the U.S. code from being broken by the Germans. And this will also be used in World War II if you've ever heard of the Navajo Code Talkers. Hispanic soldiers. Many soldiers from the Southwest states served in the war. Hispanic and African American soldiers, however, were much more likely to be assigned labor and support jobs. Hispanic soldiers, however, did not serve in segregated units. Marcelino Serna was the most decorated soldier from Texas. In fact, he was one of the most decorated soldiers in the entire war. He was nominated for the Congressional Medal of Honor, but did not receive it due to racism. Asian Americans. Look at the women in the middle. The woman on the right was the first woman to fly in the U.S. Army as a pilot. She did a support role. She did not fight a combat role. So the Asian Americans were mostly Chinese, some Japanese, some Filipinos, and a few from South Asia. Most of the Japanese were from California and Hawaii. The Filipinos also were immigrants to Hawaii. In spite of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which did not permit them to become citizens, Chinese American veterans were awarded citizenship after the war, kind of as a thank you or a prize or a present. South Asians, there were very few South Asian immigrants to the U.S. at the time, as the region was a British colony. So most people from the area that would become the independent country of India after World War II, Pakistan, Bangladesh, they usually immigrated to England. However, in the U.S., most of the South Asians served at U.S. military bases and not in Europe. Women. Some British and American women acted as ambulance drivers, nurses, telephone operators, and many other support roles. They also took the place of men in factories and farms at home. Where's the long hair? Corsets, long dresses, women wearing pants. What's next?